either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And so begins a review of a film about a group of silly Brits and one Yankee that solidified many of our tastes in humor, and what we expected English humor to be like. The one, the only, Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Truly one of the greats.
One of the best ever.
But actually,
I can't keep that
I cannot do the fake reporter documentary voice for very long.
David Attenborough.
Yeah. Man. Yeah.
We had joked about doing that for the whole episode, but
I mean, this movie's a little long, so I don't think if I could have done it. But without joking, truly one of the greats. This movie is constantly rated one of the highest comedy films, most influential comedy film of all time.
Mm-hmm. And for those who have been living under a rock,
a really large rock,
still medieval peasants, Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a series of sketches that come together to form a quirky and absurd Arthurian quest for the Holy Relic itself.
It is kind of a musical, something that the directors would really like to point out, as it was something they had always wanted to film. There is exactly one musical number.
Kind of. There's technically two.
There is technically two. They were incredibly, gung-ho about the fact that there was musical bits in their first true movie.
Well, it's like Burst City, where it's kind of a musical, but not really.
Yeah. No, this was not the beginning of Monty Python by any means, but this was Monty Python's first true movie.
Outside of, what was it? And now what is it called? And Now for Something Completely Different.
Yes.
Which is an actual Monty Python movie.
Yeah. The stuff that had come before this had all been short sketch based. They did have film length productions before this, but they were all skits scored together into one long production piece. Mm-hmm. This was the first one where they truly had a script and sets and a continuing theme. The continuing theme is the important part there. Because everything else they had done before, similar taste, similar style, minus King Arthur bit, but it was very much more separated into a little 5-minute skit here, a little 10-minute skit there, and not all of it went together. In fact, most of it didn't go together.
Yeah, my experience with Monty Python is mostly this, and then Life of Brian, which I finally saw a couple years ago now.
Life of Brian is hilarious.
The Meaning of Life, which I still have never finished. We were watching it on a soccer trip, so didn't get through it all the way. But I'm at least a little bit familiar with Terry Gilliam's work outside of Monty Python.
Oh, for sure. I've seen a good majority of Monty Python stuff that's available. It's, readily, if you think this is funny, you're gonna enjoy the rest of their stuff. Maybe not so much their first couple skits, just because it's a little rough, it's a little overly British. But for the most part, everything's kind of in similar taste. And I loved this as a high school teen. This was perfect humor for me, so I binged as much Monty Python as I could get my little grubby hands on.
Yeah, I think I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail in middle school. Well, technically American Elementary, I believe, is what you would call it.
Yeah, I think I started with, we had a DVD copy of The Flying Circus, a bunch of their skits put together. I watched that incessantly in middle school, but I didn't realize that it was the same group until a little bit later. And then I was like, oh, you mean there's a name for this?
Yeah, and I guess I just never had been exposed to it outside of this movie. Even though I lived closer to England than you did.
That's true. But I also think that for most people, this is their introduction. And honestly, with the exception of maybe Life of Brian, this is the only Monty Python thing that most people truly know. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. This is by far their best work.
Yeah. So, Monty Python and the Holy Grail was written by Graham Chapman, John Cleese, who we've talked about in 2 movies before this.
This is true.
Eric Idles, Terry Gilliam, Terry Jones, Michael Palin, and uncredited Thomas Mallory. It was directed by Gilliam and Jones. Mm-hmm. And it also stars the aforementioned people, because I'm not going to read them again.
Yeah, and when we say stars, everyone in this movie played at least 3, if not 4 to 6 roles, and with everything in this movie. for budget reasons.
Yeah. And before we get into it, our sources for today include commentary by Terry Gilliam, Terry Jones, John Cleese, Eric Idles, and Michael Dallin, as well as I read Gilliam on Gilliam by Terry Gilliam.
Yes, and if you can't tell, they love talking about their own stuff. If you get a chance, we watched this all on the very fancy edition of the DVD.
The new DVD.
It's by far the best version, I think. I've seen this on almost every version there is at this point. The new DVD, while very gimmicky, is a wonderful insight into these gentlemen's thought concepts. There's an entire section where you can watch part of the movie in Japanese dubbed, English subbed. For no reason.
Yeah.
The subbing isn't even the same as the subbing in the actual movie, because I also watched this with captions on. Mm-hmm. They're different. It's not even the same captions.
There's one where they took Macbeth. Like, if you don't like the movie, you can watch it, but the subtitles will be Macbeth.
Yes, and when I was a little concerned, because sometimes, especially with Monty Python humor, it will say something silly, but you actually do get what it says on the back of the box, which just makes it even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, that's the thing, is the whole DVD itself is a bit of a joke, and the casing itself is too, because every single feature on it, like whether it was digitally upgraded or if it was just kind of the same old same, is just new across the entire back of it.
It is, in fact, the exact same movie that you are used to. They just have put new next to it.
Exactly, yeah. Just, if you get the DVD is, I would say, 100% worth it.
I would
even if you don't want to watch the special features.
I don't know if you saw it, but on disc 1, there is a quote-unquote extras scene portion. I clicked on it, and it tells you to put disc 2 in.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Or there's For the Hard of Hearing, and it just shouts the entire menu.
I might have put that on and had to immediately turn it back off.
It's amazing.
Yes, and it normally a DVD menu, I judge a little bit on whether or not it's interactive and a little bit fun. Mm-hmm. Honestly, this one has blown it out of the park. Haven't seen this much fun since we did Shrek.
I agree. Well, one thing I do think is interesting about Monty Python and the Holy Grail is, especially going behind the scenes, is that the original draft, half of it took place in the past and half of it took place in the future. Yeah. Or in our present.
Yeah, current.
And, the ultimate goal was the Holy Grail was going to be found at Harrods, which is, I guess, some
it's
food
and
Kohl's stuff. Yeah. It's got a bunch of everything.
Yeah. It's a bit like going to the mall, but one store.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I didn't even think about, I'm glad you brought up that everything they had done movie-length sketch series before.
Yes.
But I'd never had really thought about considering their transition from TVs to movie, because for me, this is the first Monty Python.
Yes.
I didn't know all the other stuff before it. And Gilliam said that he and Jones were the main ones who pushed to make a movie because they originally wanted to see what they could do, and it seemed like they just wanted more control and better lighting.
Well, they didn't get that.
Yeah. Stating that by the time we reached and now for something completely different, I was pissed off by the way certain things were being shot. This was no longer television, but it was still being shot like television. So when the offer came to do Holy Grail, Terry and I said we wanted to direct it, not Ian, what we could do after all of our moaning, which I guess didn't hurt the group because a lot of them had the same issues that were going on. And
they are very much one of the few well-balanced, long-lasting comedy groups that we have gotten that have done this well. There's several quotes of, by the time they finally finished the script of the show, everyone else who was working on it, all 6 of them, essentially went, wow, it's garbage, let's do it.
Yeah.
And to their face were like, this is trash, I love it.
Yeah. But even then, I guess filming was rough because neither of the Terrys saw eye to eye. Eventually, Gilliam would end up being the voice behind the camera, and Jones would direct the actors himself, and then issues still continued into editing as well, kept butting heads. Terry was leaving and letting Terry have his way, only to come back to redo what Terry had done the night before.
Yes, and the actors were, this wasn't some secret or even necessarily a worry for everyone else on set. Everyone else seemed to be rather fine with this division. In fact, some of them really see Monty Python as 2 different Terry's sides of brains. Mm-hmm. Some of them call themselves the left and the right side of the Terry brain, and they have always operated having these 2 very diverse halves. They just haven't had to work on the same thing for that long before.
At that point, at least.
At that point. And so later on, especially, they leaned into this idea that they had 2 very different directors and sides of the Monty Python group, because a lot of the actors also saw themselves as leaning to one side or the other. And they felt that they balanced each other out, having half of the group being much more literal and more precise, where the other half is very much more go-getter, and let's just see how it gets done, and it'll happen. And having those two things work together, as a group, they've always said, like, is one of their strong points.
Yeah, and it definitely makes it unique in regards to the fact that you can't unless you know, and even if you do know that there's that going on behind the scenes, it doesn't feel like it's split.
No, we've definitely covered movies before where either writers or directors or actors have had big confrontation with someone else on set or the director or whoever. This is, and like you can tell usually in those movies, there's usually like some level of failure somewhere that doesn't, like, it's very clear that, like, oh, this could have been polished a little more, like, someone's not working together here. This one, despite everyone having, like, almost two divisions happening at the same time, everyone seems to unanimously agree that, like, this is what we wanted, this is what we signed up for, and it does end up working for the best because everything melds together so well.
Exactly. And I'll get into a little bit of what I think and why it works so well.
True.
So, before we get into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
We have mead. Room temperature red mead.
Elderberry mead from Juniper Tree Meadery, so cheers.
Cheers. Surprisingly good.
Very sweet.
Very, very sweet, but less disgusting than many others, and is a delightful after breath of old lady perfume. I love it.
Yes, please sponsor us.
Please.
So, Monty Python opens on Dennis on the Job, which I completely forgot about this opening.
I did too, because the version that I in high school had, this has been cut off.
Oh.
Because the TV version, I think, the one that at least played regularly on the cable that I had, and the DVD version I had at the time, which, granted, was burned from a copy off the library, both had this section removed, and I had forgotten fully about this, and I panicked for a hot second thinking I'd clicked the wrong menu button.
I was thinking my DVD was broken at first, and then
they really get you. Like, it plays just long enough, too, for you to really be like, maybe I should get up.
Yeah, well, it's also their way to immediately start subverting expectations. We've talked about directors subverting genre expectations, but Monty Python goes so far in its absurdity that they start their movie with another movie.
A completely different movie, which also looks like a bad movie.
And imagine, like, going to see this in theaters and you're just sitting there for, like, a good minute and a half.
I do feel like this movie came out in 1975, and so it missed the opportune peak of having stuff happen in the movie theater with your movie.
Oh, yeah, well, kind of like a Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Or even Clue, where, like, there was multiple endings released to different theaters. And I feel like Monty Python would have been all over that if that had been, like, a thing on their brain during the time.
Well, I think it was a thing on their brain. It's just they constantly were pushing the envelope of what the joke was for that scene.
Very true. And I'm sure they would have done it if their budget hadn't been so low.
Well, we find out about that real quick because the opening with Swedish credits, nonsensical moose bullshit.
I live for these credits. I regularly text my friends and family, also Wick. I don't know if they know what it's from, but I don't care. These are hilarious. There is the most massive epilepsy warning that should ever be placed on a movie.
Oh, yeah.
Right at the beginning.
When we get to the llama credits and whatnot. And also just, like, the comedy of, like, the sacking, like...
They fire people halfway through the credits.
Well, it's breaking the fourth wall in a way that we don't see a whole lot of. They break the fourth wall later on, too.
We don't see this type of breaking a fourth wall with movies. We do see it with YouTube editors, where the YouTuber and the editor are two separate people, and the editor puts himself in either with text or with his own little animated person that occasionally pops in. We do see that a lot here, and I honestly think that, like, some of that came from all of us being raised with this nonsense.
I can see that. But yeah, it's just a great little bit of humor to begin with. And
yeah, it really lightens the mood. It sets expectations just on the floor, which, perfect. That's where they need to be.
Well, not even that, not even on the floor, because imagine going from Dennis on the Job to this, and then you see this nonsensical moose bullshit.
I love it.
And then the sackers, or the subtitlers getting sacked.
And then they change to, like, mariachi music at some point.
Well, there's a shift in another music too, because it shifts to nicer music.
Oh, yes, it does. It
orchestral.
Yes.
But this was done because they didn't have a budget to actually film credits, they did it in the style of Bergman.
Yes, and also they did admit that they could have learned Swedish for this, but they would have had to learn Swedish for this, and they didn't want to.
So they just made it look Swedish.
And honestly, it's I think better that way, because there's already captions happening because the editor is talking to you via captions and cards on the screen. This is a brilliant opening.
Yeah, you get bit by a moose.
Yeah, his sister also got bit by a moose.
And then, the chaos of the llama credits, and it just completely dissolves from there into England 1932.
And they recognized in the commentary that England 1932 is not when the King Arthur legend takes place. It's not when this movie even takes place. They just liked the time.
Yes, and they're aware that their costuming's from the 14th century, where the stories were told, and the 10th century is when it's supposed to, at least this version of it's supposed to have taken place.
I love how they clearly know the King Arthur legend fairly well.
Oh, not just that. They talk about, all the plays and stuff that they were interested in, and, the books they were reading in the commentary. Yes. They are a bunch of history nerds.
They are, and they used that in such a clever way to have just good enough costuming and set picking and little bits thrown in that do add a little bit to, the whole, you're sucked in, you truly do believe that it's 932, despite none of this taking place during that time period. Yeah. And then you find out later that it's actually happening during the modern time, and but kind of, because we go away in the police car.
Yeah. Well, it starts off even from that scene, it starts off as serious and dark with a man on the wheel, which for those who don't know and haven't seen, it's a form of torture and execution. But then immediately goes into Knights with Coconuts.
Yes.
Which his servant, even the name Patsy, I didn't realize until rewatching this multiple times that all the servants, their names are horses' names.
Yes, and the entire reason that they have coconuts, which is honestly one of the longest lasting jokes ever made in history of movies, I think, having the two coconuts and stomping along with them, was inspired from radio. This was a pretty common technique for when you had radio shows and you'd have an entire soundboard that the voice actors themselves would be operating. Mm-hmm. So they took inspiration from that. Clever, love it. But also they didn't want to have to A, find and buy horses, and B, teach everyone to ride a horse. This was much cheaper.
And 3, they probably couldn't afford horses to begin with.
They 100% could not have afforded horses to even appear in this film.
Oh, not at all. Well, I also appreciate that they call out how absurd it seems that there's coconuts in 932 England,
immediately, and the movie itself even recognizes that this is just the silliest, but there is not a single horse in this film. No one ever rides a horse. Everyone uses coconuts. So even though that the movie themselves admit this is silly, this is clearly the normal.
But at the same time, because I did a little bit of reading because I was curious of when coconuts were actually introduced into England, I was surprised because they were available to the rich in the Middle Ages, but it was the late Middle Ages when they actually became relatively common for regular people. So,
we could have maybe had a coconut.
Yeah.
I don't think we would have been using it as horseshoes. I have no doubt in my mind it would have been a center place thing that you oohed and awed at.
Yeah, like pineapples.
Exactly, like pineapples.
Yeah. Also, a budgetary thing that's kind of interesting is all the shots we have of the castle are just different angles of Dunn's Castle.
Part of that was because they had picked several actual castles in Scotland that they wanted to use for this movie. But about a week or two before they were going to start shooting, they got a letter from the Historic Castle Preservation Department, or whatever it's called, essentially saying, hey, we don't really feel comfortable with you touching and messing with the castle. Can you maybe not? And so they reworked real quick, and they're like, well, this one we can still use. We have a friend who has a castle, or has access to a castle. And then I've made this little miniature that we can hang from a tree and look at from a distance, which is part of the reason why Camelot is shot the way it is.
Yeah. It's just a fun little bit to I think it's great because it reminds me a little bit of how Lord of the Rings says it was the greatest independent or the largest budget amateur film ever made.
Yeah.
Everyone is flying by the seat of their pants, just trying to figure it out as they go.
100%. Also, you should know that this first view of the castle is actually a still image of said castle that they have then just panned the camera across. This is a very historically famous picture of the castle, and it's often seen in people's textbooks, and so a lot of people recognize this exact photo.
That just seems exactly like something they do because of a budget.
Yeah.
And immediately from here, we go to a plague sketch where it's dirty, dusty, or dusting a cat out. That I don't. That's one thing I never even got as a kid, is like why smacking the cat on the wall or stepping on the cat was like kind of a running gag.
It is 100% a running gag. It was a little bit of a, like, just Monty Python in general, but it wasn't enough to be like, oh, that's the Monty Python, like, calling card. It was just they had the prop already. It was, like, in the prop box, and they thought to themselves, well, it's here. I guess we're gonna use it.
I guess. But, I mean, even this is a funny scene because we're setting this scene outside of our main cast, and it's just another sketch that's only tied to it with Arthur and Patsy marching through the area where he must be a king. Why? Because he ain't got shit all over him, which they did say, and surprisingly, I would have thought a lot of this movie was ad-libbed. No, this was like one of this was the only line, or maybe one of the only like 2 or 3 lines that was ad-libbed for the entire movie. Yeah, no, they actually had like a fairly solid script, and they all did kind of, even the actors agreed that like the script's pretty solid. The acting portion and what like slapstick gags, some of that was a little bit more ad-libbed, the cat being a great example. Another example of just dedication to the bit is you'll notice that it's hard not to, that most of the peasants in this scene are wallowing in mud and filth of some kind. And they wanted to have different peasants be doing different peasanty, quote-unquote, peasanty things in the mud. So some of them are picking up the mud and, like, putting it somewhere else. And I'm trying to think of the best way to joke about this.
Yes, the shit shifters.
The mud turtles whose food looks like what they're moving around.
Yeah. Speaking of which, one of the guys... One of the bits that had been actually written into the script was that he would be eating mud. And he says, I'm not going to eat the mud because there are actual live pigs. The pigs made a mess in the mud. I'm not going to eat the actual mud. And they said, no, of course we're not going to have you eat the mud. We have chocolate. It's there. It just looks like the mud. You're going to eat the chocolate. And it's next to the mud. Just be sure to pick up just the chocolate. Well, that didn't work. Chocolate got in the mud immediately. Yeah. And so he agreed that for like, it was supposed to be the one take, ended up being a few takes. He would just eat actual mud. What a trooper. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's even just the whole bring out your dead and so good. The old man bartering just I'm happy. But they also bring up like the regulations. Like it's the first time that outside of like the opening credits and stuff where we have like the first bit of commentary on modernism. That's true. Like I can't take him. Regulations. Yeah. But he's gonna die soon. Yeah. No, they clearly knew a great deal about the like medieval ages because they have just enough jokes that are blurring that line between what we know now versus what they know. And like they even occasionally over-explain like the feudal system to themselves. Oh yeah, well that's exactly what they do in the next scene because now's the scene where the peasants are just moving mud around. There's nothing else happening. They're just moving mud or making a mess for no reason. Yeah. And just in a field. I mean, it's great because it's bringing up lower class, quote unquote, uneducated of the time, but also poking fun at the fact that the Arthurian government is kind of stupid because you got your power from a lady in the lake who gave you a sword. Yeah. I also love that, like, they even admit that, like, part of the reason they wanted to have all this emphasis on peasants in the mud and is partially because of the inadequate, like, understanding of the, like, peasant system that we have, like, created. They're like, well, if we're gonna believe that the peasants are stupid, we're gonna, like, really make them stupid. All the peasants here, so dumb, rolling in mud. But, at the same time, they're the ones who are getting the last word in against the nobility. That's true. I also love that this is the first scene where you can very clearly start to see repeat actors. Because if you didn't know the Monty Python, and I honestly think most people did not really know the Monty Python group very well until this movie became popular, this is like the first scene where you're like, wait a minute, that old lady looks an awful lot like the man from the last scene. Yeah, well, at the same time, I think it works so well because I can't remember where I was reading it. It might have been in Gilliam on Gilliam, where he brought up that
Monty Python was actually kind of a serious medieval movie.
I mean, yeah.
And, well, in a lot of ways it is too, because if you think about like kind of traditional English theater, Shakespearean theater, you got men playing women, you got men playing men.
That's true.
You got men playing...
We even get a musical number. Like, it's, I mean...
Yeah.
And, like, they do touch on a lot of actual historical importance, like, come see the violent inherent in the system. He's not wrong!
No.
It's just done in the dumbest way.
It is.
And especially now that we live in an age where, like, YouTube is flooded with videos of people who are, like, just constantly yelling this sort of thing, but in all seriousness, out in, like, the Walmart parking lot to random people.
Yeah.
This just makes it even funnier, because this feels like the Karen screaming at you through your glass.
Yeah, but it also does... We still have that same, like, oh, I'm so anti-government. It's not fully like punk, but it's got those vibes of people who still think they're punks even though they live in the suburbs.
And they have a 9 to 5, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the pacing of this movie is we've gone through, I wrote 3 sketches, but arguably we've probably gone through about 5 if you include Dennis on the Job and the credits.
True. No, those are both, I think, you should count.
Yeah. And just how there is not really like a lull to this movie at all, because immediately after this we go on to probably the most iconic portion of this movie, the Black Knight. Oh,
definitely. This is one of the best. I also think that this movie did something for Monty Python that the other stuff, while good, doesn't have as much emphasis on, and that is the number of Monty Python people on scene at any point. Most of the time, even if they are peasants, as opposed to like having the full night regalia, we have a significant more number of background people, of different characters coming in for this whole movie, people playing different roles even though they're all on screen at the same time. And I do think that helps like flush out the amount of skit that they can shove into this movie, because there's always something happening in the background. You can watch this movie several times in a row and you will notice a different person doing some other nonsense.
Oh yeah.
Every time you watch it. And that's very different than their older, like their original stuff that they put out. A lot of that was very much the joke and the straight man, or having like maybe 4 people on set at once. It was very much more standard sitcom style, where, I mean, it was very much Monty Python humor. There was a lot of like who's on first styling of jokes.
Yeah, I've seen the Spam and I've seen the Dead Parrot. Those are like the 2 skits I've seen.
And honestly, like those are pretty standard like stylings for them. This had a lot more stuff happening all the time, and honestly a lot more physical humor happening.
Oh yeah.
And I think it adds all.
Well, and I think part of it is too because we've still tried to maintain a level of seriousness to this movie, especially with Arthur's character through and through.
I love that Arthur's character he never thinks that he is the joke.
No, he's the straight man of this entire series.
And it's great.
Well, also, like, the lead up to the Black Knight is all epic. It feels proper. That's true. It's a less sparkly Excalibur.
Yeah.
But it works, because that's the thing about their comedy, is that it sets up a perspective and constantly keeps shifting it, because I was rewatching it, I was constantly lulled back into, like, even though I know this movie, it's like, oh, this is actually kind of a serious moment. Like, you guys are actually building up something here, and then you're completely smashing it. That's true. And I also really appreciate that they have elements from both the Arthurian lore and also just old lore in general, like the Black Knight, and they are incorporating in. None of this has a timeline. This movie has no timeline. It kind of does. I mean, a little bit, but like not in the same way that like the true Arthurian tale does, where you have like decades worth of adventures and challenges, and you know. Yeah, it's missing the Green Knight, Galahad sleeping with Guinevere. Honestly, all the wizards. Tim does not count. Is there more wizards than Merlin? Yeah. I've never read Arthur, so I don't know. I know very little. Like, It's okay, but yes, there is significantly more than I think even just like most of us have like bothered to boil down. Oh right, there's the sexy witch lady in Excalibur. Yes, there's the sexy witch lady, along with some others. And like honestly, like they end up playing a rather big role in like who cheats on who, and then that turns into political nonsense. Yeah, like, she pretends to be Guinevere, sleeps with Arthur, has a son that kills him. That's very Hamlet-ish. Yeah, there's a lot of that. This movie pretty much went, well, what's only the cool parts? And not even that. What's a few of the characters that we can pull from? And we will sprinkle them in. And honestly, it feels like enough. Yeah, I mean... It just paints the idea of Arthur. Well, and they do that very well later on in the movie, too, because the Black Knight iconic as it is not my favorite part of the movie, believe it or not. Like, as much as I think the flesh wound is funny...
It is hilarious.
I just think in high school, a lot of us overused it, so it's, like, lost a lot of its
I agree.
charm.
Apparently, the flesh wound bit, for some audiences over the seas, they had a little bit of trouble with the flesh wound, because it is a little tiny bit gory. I mean, a little bit, and they had a hard time looking past the idea of, like, chopping off a man's arms and legs for humor. It eventually came around. This is now, again, one of the world's greatest comedies ever produced. It's on just about every nation's list in the top 100 at some point. Fun fact, they did not use a lot of stunt doubles. In fact, they almost used no stunt doubles. But they had one guy, and it's this guy.
Yeah.
And it's just for the scene where he's on one leg.
Yeah, they found a one-legged silversmith that they could bring in and who would just do it for them.
Who apparently had the greatest time, and the part of the reason that they chose to have this guy is because they needed to dig a hole for his leg to go in, so that way when they chop off the last leg, he's just on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And their logic was, it's easier to dig one hole than two holes. Which is not true. You would, I believe the hole was roughly the same size.
You would just dig one hole for both legs.
That's exactly my thought, but that's their quote, not mine.
Maybe just the absurdity of their own commentary as well.
I think so.
But this was an example where they brought up in the commentary that the whole mentality was just to take the ridiculous concept and pursue it as relentlessly as possible.
Yes.
To the point where we have completely dismembered this knight minus his head, and he still thinks he can win.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah. And we get into another bit of monks chanting Pie Jesu Domine Donais Requiem. I have this thing. My brothers and I used to do that as kids, and we'd take a book and smack our heads with it.
So did we. I'm amazed my mother let me have books for a while.
Yeah. And the burning of the witches. This is
the best part.
Yeah, actually, you might be right. Just because there's such absurdity going on with this one, you keep looking in the background.
There's so much absurdity, and there's also a level of intelligence here that, like, is a very unique gag to play. Mm-hmm. There's an understanding about witches, but honestly, this is the wrong time period. But that's okay. I mean, a little bit.
There's still witches. We've discussed this.
I know, but like. There's this there's like these levels of, wow, you know that this is wrong all the way through, as far as like churches do not float, small rocks do not float, and yet it is one of the greatest comedy lines. And it's not just because it's ridiculous. It is the timing of it. It is the reaction of everyone else standing around having the same level of insanity for the rest of this scene.
Yeah, well, it's because you have Bedivere, who's the straight man, who's the man of logic, even though he's...
wrong most of the time.
Well, wrong, but also not, like, he's partially right. You can tell he's scientific, because the first scene we see him in, he's strapped coconuts to birds to try and get them to fly. Again, carrying on that, like, visual joke of something that they brought up earlier.
Yeah.
And on top of that, just, like, everyone in this scene is so great. The man with, like, the shaving cream still on his face. John Cleese being, like, overly vigorous to burn this witch.
Yes. And, like, their effort into making all of the background people feel like they have just come out of doing something in their house to see the burning of the witch. Like, the shaving cream guy, there's, like, one guy who's just holding stuff that they had around set, and they're like, yeah, you just were doing things. Come on.
Yeah.
And it all adds to this, like, fake narrative that you, as the audience, just build in your mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it also plays into, like, the stereotypes of the fake nose, which is clearly a modern rubber fake nose.
Yeah.
And calling them out on it's like, yeah, we did that. And the hat, too. And but we didn't do the what.
Yeah. And, like, this scene was shot a handful of times. The timing on it, each person did a little differently. And there's a few spots where it is fun to try and see that you can almost catch some people cracking up.
Trying to laugh, yeah. Well, it's just great, too, because, like you said, the absurdity of, like, well, what floats? Like, the logic they're putting two and two together feels accurate for something that old. At least what we think.
Exactly, no. Like, this level of, like, A plus B must equal D, despite it not.
Yeah.
Is... just, it really helps play into the whole, like, we had the peasants rolling in mud earlier.
Well, in a way, it's also its own little bit of commentary on, like, mob mentality.
Sure.
And it doesn't play out like The Lodger of London Fog Story, Hitchcock's movie, but it plays out more so, like, well, maybe sometimes mob mentality is right, but hey, you gotta sit and think about it just a little bit before someone really is a witch.
True. I also love that this entire skit rides on the backbone of thinking that science must be right. So whatever the science says, if she weighs as much as a duck, then she is a witch. Sound logic, because no woman weighs as much as a duck. But the science is already wrong because the scales are wrong.
Are they, though?
They are. That she takes it off and you can see them actively move.
Yeah, but, I mean, you take the balance out from a scale and...
No, like, before they even put her on, there is, like, significantly different heighted logs to prove that the scales are already out of balance. And instead of fixing the out-of-balance scales, he's just put 2 different size logs underneath them.
But she does turn out to be a witch. She even says it.
Yeah, but, like... It's just a great running gag.
Yeah, I guess something I pick up on. But I do love it. It's such a great scene in the movie too, because even though Sir Bedivere, which his mustache is absolutely ridiculous.
It is, and I also love that they did do their research for the costuming of this movie. It's not terribly accurate, again, budget reasoning. But they did find a helmet that looked roughly like his, and they thought to themselves, this is the most impractical helmet of all time. We're giving it to him.
Because he's constantly holding it up.
Yes, and it's always on his mustache. It's always slamming down.
Yeah, it's a great scene in general, because, and I mean, Arthur comes in to, like, bring logic and educate the peasantry.
Yes, but the only thing he truly does is just add a, like, common knowledge thing.
He just says a duck. That's his only logic to this movie.
Yes, but clearly.
Or to this portion.
Well, maybe the whole movie. But it doesn't matter because everyone else is equally stupid.
Yeah, and we see with Sir Bedivere as he's quick to follow Arthur, but Arthur comes to him for scientific knowledge.
Yes, I don't know if he really benefits ever from that, but I love the idea.
Yeah, but also in continuing to subvert the expectations of this movie, after we meet Sir Bedivere, you would think, okay, we're going to meet a bunch of the other knights. And we kind of do, but it's all fast-tracked through a storytelling of a book, which this is what one of the Terrys or someone else in the commentary said they used to interlock the sketches was this book. And I don't think it works as well as they wanted it to be. I think all the sketches just work well enough without.
I agree. I don't think the book helps add anything to it, and I think part of that is because they, again, for budget reasons, decide to film this. It's one of the Terrys' own homes. The hand is his wife's hand, and then he jokingly went to the shop earlier that day and got the gorilla hand just because he thought it was a little funny. Well,
I wonder too, because you see the gorilla, like we talked about in, I think it was just a gag of its era, because it was in The Magical Christian, the gorilla's a thing, and God, what's the movie? I think it's Trading Places.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because joke shops were an actual, like, place that you could buy things. I don't think they were ever much of a thing here, but from what I can gather, they were, like, a kiddie's joke shop was a place that you could get jokey things. And I guess Gorilla was on the menu. I honestly don't know, because the only jokey shop I've ever seen is in, like, ye old western recreation towns.
Hairspray,
yeah, Hairspray. So, like, sure, why not? I'm sure they also sold soap that got your hands dirty and, like, those little lighters that also shock you.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't work for me. It does kind of work because I do like that they fast track the rest of the crew, because that would have taken this movie would have been 2 hours if they had tried to do that.
It would have been so long. And also, like, they add, like, 3 knights that are literally never seen again.
Sir will not appear in this film, which
Sir
is
Babyface.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It just doesn't work for me 100%.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think part of that was because, like, some of this was put in last second.
Yeah, budgets. But now we are on to Camelot, musical time, and joke of the low budget cutout.
Yep.
Which, honestly, I do actually kind of like this musical
I do too.
a bit. One, because it's from out of nowhere.
It's really left field.
And it makes fun of itself in Camelot that, like, hey, Arthur's on this quest to find all these other knights, but he's got a bunch of knights back home.
But they are so silly. It's such a silly place that he won't even go back.
Well, they're a menace to the entire castle themselves.
They're, like, out here kicking the stuffed cat again.
Stepping on the stuffed cat, kicking the help, having to push the pram a lot.
The poor chicken that is in the scene as this extra is just constantly fighting for its life. But
Yeah.
this scene was so popular that this scene specifically inspired the later TV show Spamalot, which was very popular.
There's a show Spamalot?
There's a show called Spamalot, and it is essentially the King Arthur retelling, but a musical. The whole thing's a musical. Every episode has a musical number. And it was incredibly popular when it came out.
I hate it.
You would, in fact, absolutely hate it. I even couldn't stand it. But, like, they straight up have said several times, like, Spamalot is this scene from Monty Python. We thought it was so funny that we just ran with it. And we were like, what if the entire thing was a musical? And, like, granted, some of the musical numbers are funny, but they're not Monty Python.
Taking the ridiculous concept and pushing it as far as you can go.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a fun scene. I mean, it's not my favorite either, but it
is a catchy tune, though.
Unfortunately, it is. But I do like it because it is a nice little break in kind of a little bit of seriousness that we've had. But again, it's just the ebb and flow of, all right, we'll be serious for a second here, and then we'll be comedic for another minute.
Yes, and I also appreciate that it does answer a few plot holes that they had run into. They were going to have some scenes at what was supposed to be actually Camelot, but the castle that they wanted to use, they weren't going to be able to do, again, to budgetary reasons, and then also being asked not to touch the historical monument. And so they thought to themselves, what if Camelot is a silly place and we can't go there?
Well, and I get it too. In a way, it's kind of poking fun at the castles that didn't accept them.
Yes.
Because I think the reason they said was they were afraid that they were going to hang a bunch of banners that would deteriorate the structural stability of the castle.
I understand their reservation, because later on we do throw cows and stuff off the castle.
Well, I mean, if you think of, like, Excalibur and other movies like that, of course they're going to have big banquet halls. They're going to have banisters flying from everywhere.
Even this movie does have a banquet hall scene. It's just, it's shot on a set instead of...
And it's very sparsely decorated. Like
it is, and part of that was, again, due to budget.
Yeah. I just think the castle said no, not realizing how small the budget they actually had to work with.
That's true, because the one castle that did say yes, they only had a very small portion of the battlement to shoot from, to the point where they had to shoot straight down onto the actors.
Yeah. And it works.
Yeah, it does work.
But after Camelot, they are immediately given the quest for the Holy Grail.
Yeah, and God just shows up. I love how this was a pre-existing image that they just stuck a god crown on and went, that's God.
Yeah, well, and also just the way he acts, too, is like, don't grovel. I hate it when they grovel.
What are you doing? Stop averting your eyes.
Yeah, it's just, it feels classic, but it's the attitude of it's not.
Yes, I also love that this is our first true mixed media experience that we're getting.
Well, outside of the book.
Yeah, we did have the book, but even the book just kind of felt like, oh, well, we have some pictures, and then like a physical book that we're flipping through. This one, we get like a full-on paper cutout to play with. It's fun, and also like it really sets the visual style for a lot of the promotional material of this movie.
Yeah, the butt trumpets, the cloud door.
Yeah, like the whole thing, like they leaned into...
DVD.
No, the entire DVD. Honestly, a lot of the stuff that later on was Monty Python themed that was like keychains and, like bags, posters, all that sort of stuff. This was the style for the most part.
Yeah, it's medieval.
And also just so stupid.
Yeah. Well, also, because if you think about it, I also appreciate that the book isn't traditionally used the way I would think it is too, because if you really think about it, the book would kind of be the bookends for the entire movie. That's how the movie would start. That's how the movie would end.
True.
But they don't do that.
Yes, I do appreciate that.
But now it is the quest for the Holy Grail and our first meeting with the French.
Again, showing that our writers and our directors were actually history nerds. Because they even said like, yes, the classic enemy of the English, the French.
What are you doing here? Mind your own business.
So good. And honestly, it was something that like my high school history teacher even pulled out and was like, they're not far off. They're fairly correct. There was just like disputes on who had what, and people just showed up and was like, I live here now, it's mine.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the old world was, is just like, I killed your people, it's mine now.
And like nobody told anyone else. They're just French people hanging out here.
Yeah. Well, also, real quick, one thing I noticed on the scene is while they're going to the castle, there's just some dude in the background smacking water.
Yeah. He's working hard.
Totally. The peasants do nothing.
They do nothing, and it's great.
But back to the French.
Yes.
I love that they're just so poking fun at the English to, like, get them pissed off of, like,
it's so good.
We already got a grail. I told them we already had a grail.
Yes. I also love that they knew they only had so much prop for this, and what they felt was a big portion of the prop was the outfit. However, the way they had to film it cut off most of the outfit. Mm-hmm. And so to get around not having most of the outfit, he just, like, flops his little handsies and his mittens over the castle.
Well, not only that, but just the amazing insults that come from it. And I'm not talking about, and the reason we had elderberry mead.
Of course.
Your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries.
Which is classic and fantastic.
Fantastic. But a lot of his other insults are so much better than that basic one.
I agree. I fully agree. My favorite is, of course, the fart noise.
Yeah. It's very cheesy and stupid.
It's so childish.
Oh yeah, and then they throw the animals at them.
They do, and, like, I love that even, like, this is how much of a history nerd they were. They were like, yeah, no, like, people actually would do this, but it was kind of usually in reverse, where you throw dead and, like, diseased things into the castle. Mm-hmm. So they're just doing it wrong, but that's okay.
Well, they're doing it wrong because they're the French.
That was their excuse.
Also, I'm pretty sure this is my base understanding of the French after actually being in Paris as well, too.
Yeah, why not?
It's not wrong either. Like, it's kind of accurate in its comedic way.
They have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of, like, very good insults put back and forth. Both sides have a lot of very stupid ideas. Mm-hmm. One including throwing an entire cow over the battlement.
It's so bad, too.
It's so bad.
But even with, like, they're cutting to, like, the woods, this shows how big of nerds they were, too. Mm-hmm. I wrote in my notes, reminds me of Throne of Blood, a Kurosawa film, or Macbeth, which Gilliam on Gilliam also mentions that they pulled a bit from Throne of Blood and Macbeth.
Yes, I love that they, like, are just out there in the woods building a giant Trojan rabbit.
Which makes no sense, but it
makes no sense, but also, like, they couldn't do a horse, because clearly that would be not silly enough.
Yeah, I guess the rabbit's supposed to be so. I never got the rabbit as a kid. Like, it just didn't make sense. But even then, it doesn't make sense in the rest of the movie because...
No, it sure doesn't.
I don't know if the rabbit's supposed to be something that ties it to the rest of the Monty Python universe or not.
I do not think so. I think they just thought to themselves, what is the least terrifying creature? A bunny.
Oh, yeah, it's a good way of setting it up later down the line, too. Also, they're idiots because they don't actually follow through with the
No,
plan.
I also love how they have their horse legions push it up to the door and then run away.
Yes. Like in front of everyone.
Oh, yeah, no, like, it's not even that sneaky. Also, honestly, very smart editing here. Again, budget constraints meant that the rabbit was actually a little bit smaller than it shows, but it was a very large rabbit, and they wasted a lot of money on it.
Well...
So to help, they didn't show with any of the construction, they just panned back and forth between construction noises in the woods and confused Frenchmen.
I mean, milled lumber's expensive, especially in that time frame.
True, very true. This was so heavy that, like, no one could actually push it, they had to winch it up the hill.
Beautiful. But, I mean, they get scared off by the French, and that's kind of the end of the gag. And then we get another gag of a famous historian, named a famous historian in modern times, and getting killed by some knight. That's clearly not Arthur. You can see, you go back and rewatch it, it's not Arthur.
No, it's just a random knight that kills this man, and now they're blaming him.
Yeah.
Well, but also, like, how many knights are running around the English countryside now, I wonder?
A bunch of LARPers.
A bunch of LARPers in 1975.
Yes. This is an interesting spot, too, because we've kind of consolidated the movie for just a little bit.
True.
And they're barely together, and we're already splitting them back up, because that's the best idea to search for the Holy Grail.
Not technically wrong, but also leads to, honestly, some of the best skits, I think.
Yeah. I mean, because we have a straight man that's barely in the movie for the rest of it.
That's true.
He gets in later, but a good chunk of the movie is now the tale of Sir Robin, who's being made fun of the whole time because he's a coward. He's
not quite so brave as Lancelot.
No, very cheesy beware signs.
I love that his, like, shield symbol is also a giant chicken.
Yeah.
It's like a really big chicken.
Yeah, not even a rooster, a chicken.
A big chicken.
But also, the torture that keeps getting brought up is, it keeps getting worse and worse, and they stop at his penis being split.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about penis splitting in season 6, just an FYI, everyone.
Of course. Why wouldn't we?
But yeah, I mean, it's a great bit because we do get to the three-headed knight who's can't come to a conclusion of what they're going to do to him. And by the time they do come to that conclusion,
it's too late.
Run away.
Yeah, too late.
Yeah, and you can see the budget in this too. Like if you look at the armor,
the costuming is so bad, but honestly, it's also so good because it just really motivates you. Like if you want to be one of these characters for Halloween, easy, just some cardboard and some paint, and you've got the same quality.
Yeah, get your grandma to knit you a little hood for your chainmail.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like even they were like, yeah, we could not afford chainmail. That's knitted.
Yeah. But it's just the comedy. Well, again, reusing people. And I think part of the reason they split everyone up
was so they could have enough people.
Yes.
Yeah, no, because while they did have an impressive amount of background people on this movie for a Monty Python film, there's a huge reason why they mostly are the only ones on their films. And it's because they don't have the money to pay people normally.
Nope.
So we go back to having just the main group, kind of, with a handful of people sprinkled here and there.
Mm-hmm. Which is fun to see. I mean, this scene's funny, but it's not like the best scene.
No.
I mean, it still stands. But that's the thing is, even without...
Well, and it's rememberable, because the costuming's so bad. It's clearly 3 men squished in together in a giant shirt with holes cut in it.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, yes, the jokes on this one are not maybe the peak jokes, or it's not your favorite joke, but the imagery is so iconic every time you see something.
But that's what's great about all these scenes is they honestly stand alone without the rest of the movie, too.
I agree. In fact, I just had this conversation with a friend who actually does not like Monty Python, and a huge part of that is because they don't like British humor. And this is very British humor. Mm-hmm. This is honestly the most British of British humor. And she admitted even that she was like, I think I would like it better if it was just little skits, and I only had to watch maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time.
Mm.
And then I would probably like it, because then it wouldn't be too much British humor. I was like, yeah, honestly, if you want, I will just send you clips.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of works with, like, today's YouTube and TikTok bullshit reels.
I agree. I also think, though, that, like, it definitely influenced America's style of, like, comedies as well. A lot of our comedies turned into much more, like, small skits joined together with a bigger thing. Granted, different styling of humor, different sets, very different budget most of the time. Mm-hmm. But, like, the idea of having a lot of little things that are just kind of, like, loosely tied together with, like, a few recurring characters definitely influenced us.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we've talked about movies in the past couple episodes where it feels like it's a bunch of, like, little bits that don't fully add up to the whole, aka Looking at You, The Magic Christian, and God's Not Dead.
That one very much.
Yeah, because this one, it doesn't matter that they're not as connected, because immediately from the three-headed knight we go to Sir Galahad the Chaste in the grail-shaped beacon.
This is my husband's favorite scene of the whole movie.
Shocking.
By like a long shot. He thinks like he will come out of the woodworks to watch just this scene and then like depart again.
Yeah, because there's pretty women. There
is pretty women, but also like he finds this just so funny that Sir Galahad just spends the whole time being wooed by these beautiful ladies. And then it ends with the last gal being like, ah, shit, he got away. And it's like a hard shit.
Well, it does make you wonder, like, their intentions, because the opening to this scene is very spooky and horror until we meet the nuns, who are all 16 to 19 years old in the Castle Anthrax. They all have horrible names, too.
Such terrible names. And they're all, like, they clearly put out a calling card that was like, we need ladies between this size, this age to this age, and preferably blonde.
Well, they did mention that they had a group that they wanted to, but they couldn't afford to bring them up from England, so they had to choose local Scots. And they also kind of insulted them, too, while in the commentary, they're just like, yeah, they were pretty, but they weren't as pretty as we wanted them to be. And it's like,
but honestly,
well,
like, I think the skit works so well, because also you can really tell which of, like, because there's clearly only one extra here who is got real acting chops. Most of the other gals clearly got the direction to like sit over here and giggle.
Yeah.
And like they do it well, but like it's so obvious that they're not actors, but it works because like you don't care.
Yeah, they kind of make me think of the sisters from the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
where they're all just like, oh, we're so alone, we're
Men.
boy crazy.
Okay, so again, this is showing their history nerdness. They talk about in one of the interviews about how they took inspiration from some of the nunneries that were like famous for sneaking in men and like not being as chaste as they should have been.
I have seen many of these documentaries, Chris.
Not the ones you've watched, but this was like a running thing back in the day. Granted, some of them are more blown out of proportion than others, I'm aware, but like this was a common rumor / fantasy, as you've mentioned, but also it plays off of like the mermaid thing, but they didn't have the budget to go to sea.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is a great scene too, because it's just building upon like their whole bullshit of like, oh, we're gonna be so pure, so chaste, and then just
It's clearly not. Like, clearly bad intentions happening here.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also making fun of, like, the writing process itself, where they're like, we thought this would be a horrible bit, just full of pussy jokes. And then they cut that to have the rest of the movie tell them to get on with it. Like, they're waiting.
Hurry up.
Like, they're waiting physically for, like, the next scene to happen, so that way they can just get on with their day.
Yes, no. I also think that this scene really does help add to the skit style pacing, because it turns it in, I think it changes a lot of people's interpretation of it, even if you don't recognize it, from being just little skits to more of an Odyssey feel, where you're stopping at like different islands or different scenarios with these characters, even though the reality of the situation is we didn't have enough people and we didn't want to hire more Monty Python people. No.
And even then, the scenes with them are really, or with the beautiful ladies, are very short too, because Protector of Virginity, Sir Lancelot, is here, which
I love this scene, because he's like, they spend so long having this guy be the straight man, like he's not gonna fall for it, he's a good knight, and then he starts kind of being like, well, maybe, and then it's just, no, scene over, scene done, we're leaving.
Yeah, maybe I could put the tip in just a bit.
And like they immediately shut it down. They're like, no, the scene's gone on long enough, we're leaving.
Well, and even then he's making fun of Lancelot the whole way of like, I could do it. No, you couldn't. Yes, you could. And like the last lines they say to each other, I bet you're gay. No, I'm not.
It's so, like, the whole thing is so quickly paced, too, that every time you watch this, there's a different background girl to be like, what the hell are you doing back there?
They're all just, it's all great. Because, I mean, right after this, it's a good comedic scene because we go right to Arthur, who's very serious. No, I know. He's supposed to be the serious one, but out of everyone so far, his next scene feels the least impactful. Well, they even make fun of it because it's like, and Arthur got us an invaluable clue or something along those lines. Yes, pretty much. Which we still get like the gorilla hand for the transition scene, which is fine. I mean, they already had the prop. But this is very much, when they say this is a serious movie, this is very much that ghost warning, kind of giving them a guide. True. Like in Macbeth or Throne of Blood. Again, they were history nerdy buff people. Mm-hmm. They just were also silly little guys. Yeah, just a bit. Because immediately after, like, this quote-unquote serious moment, we're introduced to the knights who say ni. Yes. Who are actually kind of menacing. Like, if you think about, like, the implications of the main knight who say ni, who's probably 3 dudes in a trench coat. But... So, they wanted him to be tall and menacing. But the shrubbery that they had gotten to put out front, because they had already agreed that shrubbery was going to be the joke, because to them, they were thinking about to their own childhood and, like, their own, like, moms and aunts and, like, what's the one thing that was prized? Shrubbery. Wasn't allowed to touch the shrubberies in the yard. Yeah, putting the juxtaposition of these backwoods knights that are supposed to be these horrible killers wanting a little bit of civilization in the middle of their
highwayman
forest.
Out there to stab you in the dark. And what do they want? Shrubberies. But they needed the height to make him more menacing, but they didn't want to spend any money, so they borrowed the maintenance guy's ladder, and they stuck him on the little tiny ladder. So that's why he looks goofy.
But it works. I love it, though.
I do, too, because, like, no one else is also even close to as tall as him, and because of the optical illusion and the fact that you don't ever really see Arthur in the exact same shot, it's always, like, from behind the shoulder or something, it gives the impression that there's, like, one kind of tall guy who's, like, maybe 6'8", 6, 7 feet tall, and then a bunch of little tiny ones.
I like to think that the really tall guy is just like 5 of those little guys stacked on top of each other.
I do too, because like he's not wider, because he's just on a ladder. They didn't make the outfit bigger, they just made him taller.
Yeah. Fun little bit of trivia. In the Japanese dubbing, they request a bonsai.
Which, similar. Same vibe.
Kind of, I guess. I think bonsais are more artsy than a shrubbery.
Okay, so they always say shrubbery for this scene, but I, as a child, definitely was not super familiar with shrubbery. Like, I had a rough understanding of it, so I always misunderstood it as, like, topiary.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
And, like, I know that's not what they're asking for, because they eventually get shrubbery, and it's literally just little bushes and some plants. Like, they meant shrubbery, but in my mind, I thought they wanted, like, the Disney World style like, bushes, where they've, like, molded it into the shape of Mickey.
Yeah, I can see that.
That would have been cool, but, like, again, budget reasons, they just got some plans from Lowe's.
Or whatever the UK equivalent of Lowe's is. Even that little bit of, like, kind of seriousness, and the Knights Who Say Ni are the ones who make it comedic, and immediately we're on to Sir Lancelot and an animation being interrupted by clouds and sun jumping.
Yes.
In a very long, drawn-out transition.
This is another scene where, like, if you're in the know, it's extra funny, and it's just kind of funny if you're not. A lot of medieval drawings and, like, sides of pages that were done for, like, rewriting of text that monks had to do, they would do little silly doodles. Yeah, and like, this is inspired by the silly doodle. One of the famous silly doodles is, of course, the snail jousters.
Yeah, or knights just fighting snails in general, which they think was a joke that no one knows what the joke was anymore.
I like to imagine that's the equivalent of writing the weird little S thing on your paper, where you're like, I don't know where it came from, I just doodled it.
Yeah.
But this is, like, inspired from the, like, pure nonsense that sometimes got doodled on the sides of those texts, and I really love how they kind of took that and ran with it, because this is, like, a whole theme for a while, until we lost the budget for animation.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But I do like this bit, too, because so far we've seen all, like, the nobility as relatively serious enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get this father and son who... The son just wants to sing and dance, Daddy.
He's such a pansy little child, and I love him because he acts like he is like a 14-year-old little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And he is clearly like 32 years old, at minimum.
Well, and also the dad's kind of a, like, scumbag, too. He's like, marry her for her great tracts of land.
Yeah. Also, they purposefully found someone who, like, they wanted a balding man to play this role, and they found a man who they thought had just a little bit too much hair at first, and so, like, you'll notice that a lot of the camera shots are raised up just a hair.
That's beautiful. Well, and the scene's comedy comes from the dad being, or the king of whatever this land is, being very... straightforward, no nonsensical. He can't deal with the dumb guards who don't know what the hell to do when he's got constant hiccups.
Well, I also love that this is also a little bit of play on, like, the Who's on First style humor. This is, like, the best version of, like, the Monty Python edition of that humor, where it's like, don't let anybody in. Got it. Yeah, nobody but me. Okay, only let you in, and everybody else in. No, just me. Nobody else. Okay, what about him? No.
You both are guarding here.
Yeah. Okay. Or, like, they both try and leave with him.
Yeah.
Like, there's that level of, like, confusing stupidity. But this is such a Monty Python version of that humor that I think it's hard to reproduce anywhere else.
Yeah, or without being too, like, inspired, per se.
Or even just annoying, because normally this type of humor is, honestly, like, it either runs too long, or you get really bored of, like, the stupid character pretty quickly. These guys are honestly barely in the movie, and I think that helps.
Yes.
Because there's other stupidity happening around them. Like, there's him, like, doing the little bling, and throwing the note with the arrow out the window, and it just, like, barely makes it out the window, and then it kills a man, like, on the way down. It
almost kills Concord.
That's it, Concord. His noble steed.
Very much.
Pansy.
Again, bringing up the whole joke of, I'm not dead, I'm getting better.
No, sir, I'll be fine.
Well, and also, I think you bring up a good point of where, like, the truly stupid characters aren't there that long, and our main cast feels like a very current phase of, like, shown in anime where
Mm-hmm.
the characters are just dumb enough, but they're not complete imbeciles.
And it seems like the whole world revolves at this level of stupid, so it all kind of works. And they talk about how they didn't have a whole lot of, like, room to work with as far as, like, showing this whole scene.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to, but they had this amount of time dedicated to it, so they added all of the scenes where they, like, shoot back to Lancelot sprinting across the grounds with the drum beat.
Yeah, very Kung Pao of, like, Chosen One!
It's so Chosen One.
Which I'd wonder if Kung Pao pulled this from. I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Yes, it 100% feels very similar. And they also talk about how, like, they didn't really want an overly bloody movie, but they did feel like they already had blood because they had it from the Black Knight scene. And they're like, well, it is a little funny.
Yeah, just it has to be a little bloody of this guy coming in, rampaging random wedding guests.
Yeah, just, like, taking, and, like, it's not even like, oh, they were guards. No, like, they have flower crowns on. One of them's, like, sitting over here chewing bubblegum, essentially.
Yeah, you kick the bride in the face. I thought that was a man.
It's just so bad. But I love how even the father, who should be the most, like, straightforward of the characters in this scene, even he is goofy and silly because he's like, well, I mean, do you want to sell me land?
Or no,
do you want to marry my daughter's son?
Well, he takes the situation and
such stride.
Well, he does actually kill off the father-in-law too, because it's the whole third use of, oh, he's getting better, and then the guard just slits his throat.
No, he's dead.
Yeah. Well, it's also, like I said, taking a good chance of a situation where he's like, oh, but you can marry her, and he's just say there, Camelot, it's good pig country. Oh, we also forgot to mention, the whole reason this man's wanting land is because he's a dipshit, and he built his castle on a swamp that they don't have anything to do with it.
And I also love that they were talking about how when the son character climbs out the window, they just built, like, a little platform for him to stand on, so he's, like, just literally right there, crouched down a little bit. Which honestly makes the scene funnier.
Yeah, because he's supposed to have fallen to his death, and even he lives of like, I fell on this great man. And then he gets his musical moment, which isn't even like a real musical moment because it's happening behind the camera.
Yeah, no, like leave mid-musical.
Yeah, because Lancelot comedically tries to do the traditional, like...
The Robin Hood swing.
Yeah, Robin Hood swing away and doesn't have enough momentum and just is flying back and forth.
And they talk about how they very much based the set around they wanted, like, the Robin Hood style swing, but that's all they had space and time to build, so, like, just enough to get the one swing.
But I think that's what's great that's my favorite thing about budget movies is because you get to see what they're trying to work with. And even though, like, yeah, Asylum makes a bunch of really bad movies, it's interesting to go and see, like, what they're trying to do with the little money they have. Yeah,
for sure, because, like, honestly, most of the props for this is just flowers that they've gotten, and, like, have different people braiding it into people's hair. There's flowers just spewed about. Like, there's a stall that clearly is supposed to have, like, wedding cake and food, and there's, like, some food, mostly flowers, because that's what they already had.
Yeah, just working with what you got.
Yeah.
And speaking of working with what they got, it's now time to find the enchanter and a little bit of animation of the time passing, with the sole purpose to reduce the amount of entourage they have with each other. You lose, like, all Robin Hood, or not Robin Hood, Sir Robin's musician or minstrels, and then just, like, a bunch of other...
Yeah, we just, like, losing people so we can get everyone back together again.
Yeah, until we're finally introduced to Tim, the magician, or not magician, enchanter, which this scene...
I love Tim. So, Tim is my favorite character by a long shot.
It's so many excessive explosions that do nothing other than just, like, it's basically found, like, a dude just kind of showing off his skills.
So, they admit that the pyrotechnics are not very well timed. However, they didn't want to have the budget to reshoot, so they did it once and called it done.
Well, that was their mentality. They didn't believe in shooting more than once. Really.
Yes, but even they were like, yeah, we saw the scene. We watched how I think the most obvious version is Tim puts his staff down and, like, there's a Roman candle essentially on the end, and it takes it a second to go off.
Yeah,
like an awkward amount of time, and they just went, Meh, it's fine. Also, Tim's name in the script wasn't supposed to be Tim. It was supposed to be like a really long nonsense thing.
I'm gonna correct you there. They debunked that in the commentary. They specifically said, and this is the sorcerer Tim. His name has always been Tim. But that just shows how great their comedy is and why people thought it would be ad-libbed.
It was 100% a thing that we all were believing for a very long time.
Yeah, but if you look back at like the scene itself and how awkwardly paced everything is,
yes,
that spacing of calling himself Tim works so well with like Arthur not like knowing how to talk to him,
yes,
or anyone else having to respond in between his like random blowing shit up.
I love the random pyrotechnics.
Yeah. And we get, his purpose is just to basically drive the story on and
serve and force them to actually go find the Grail, because we've been on a lot of side quests here.
Yeah, and sort of like bring everything back together again to find the Cave of Carabanong with the last words of Ulfin Bedwyr of Redig. Or Regid, which we don't actually see his name later on in the movie either.
That's true.
It's another person. And his purpose is also to like really build up the next creature that's supposed to be terrifying. Which we're on to the cave, which the dismounting's great. It's like the horses are what's the term?
Or uneasy.
Uneasy.
And they're just like the guys with their backpacks going click 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 click.
Yeah. But again, them building up. If you haven't seen the movie before, the buildup of this terrible creature, and it turns out to be a little white rabbit,
a little fluffy bunny. This is the only part of this entire movie that I have any real, like, complaint about.
Okay.
So they talk about how this was a real rabbit. They did not buy their own rabbit. They found a lady who had a white rabbit, and she specifically asked them to not get the rabbit dirty. And they decided to put a paint substance on the rabbit when she was distracted. Here's the thing, though. And this is the only reason I have any beef. Bunnies really can't get wet. They get hypothermia incredibly easy.
Yeah,
So, this is my only beef. I don't think that was made clear to them. I think later on they have talked about how, like, that was our bad. We should have done it differently. But the bunny was technically fine. He was just stained red for a very long time because she couldn't get it out.
Yeah, I can see being annoyed with that, especially if it's like your pet rabbit.
I believe it was.
It was a meat rabbit, then.
I do not believe this was, like, a trained, like, TV rabbit. I believe this was, like, they put out an advertisement and a lady had a white rabbit.
That just seems like their entire shtick is like, hey, we got an idea. Would someone be willing to help us with this?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, and also this scene's great, too, because it deviates the expectation of a rabbit's not supposed to be terrifying, even though they do have sharp teeth.
They do have very sharp teeth. I love that they just changed to clearly a stuffed puppet rabbit on like a string that they fly across the set.
Well, it's also another way to, again, reduce the cast down to like only having...
There's like 2 people on screen at a time during the like death scenes, but it's like shot so fast that you're like, oh my gosh, it's just taking people out left to right.
It's taking out 3, sir. 4? No, 3, sir.
This whole scene, and then, of course, leading to the great holy hand grenade of Antioch.
With random monks we've never seen before.
Yeah, they're just showing up, and, like, you just accept that they're there.
Well, it also feels very much in line with classic Greek theater, where it's this Deus Ex Machina, basically.
Oh, and also, I love the way that, like,
Or Deus Ex Machina, however the hell you're supposed to say it.
I have no idea. I also love that the, like, priests and monks that show up, they feel like they've been following Arthur around, and you just haven't seen them because they've been outside of the camera zone.
Yeah.
Like, they've always been here.
Well, it's also poking fun at, like, the whole ceremony of, like, the scripture of, like, you shall count to 3. Not 4, not 5, not 6. 7 is just way too out there.
Yeah.
You shall count to 3.
Not 2 unless, again, to proceed to 3. Yeah, like, there's this whole rigmarole, and they, like, all stand there so patiently waiting that you're, like, at any moment, one of them's going to snap, and we're gonna move on with the action. But, like, no, that's the gig, is, like, they just sit there and listen to this man go on.
Yeah. Oh, shit, we did forget the knights who say whatever their long phrase they have now.
Iki, ushban, or whatever it is. Yeah.
Shit,
it's the knights who say ni rebranded.
Yeah, which is a good bit, but honestly, now that I think about it, it's kind of...
It's not as good as the Knights That Say Ni.
No.
It is funny, but it's funny in the moment in the same way that, like, the three-headed knight is funny in the moment. And it's iconic, of course, but it's not as funny as the Knights Who Say Knee.
Anywho, back to the rabbit. Arthur can't even count to 3, he counts to 4. 3, sir.
Yes, just, and then throws it, just kind of meh.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, I mean, it does explode.
Which draws the police as they enter the cave.
I love how we have kind of forgotten about the police for a second, and then, like, every time you're like, oh yeah, you're getting really drawn into the Arthurian action, the police show up to remind you that this is in fact 1970.
Yeah, they're at the Knights Who Say whatever, and, like, the shrubbery is destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they've abandoned the set, basically.
Yes.
Which, when we're in the cave, Sir Brenevere can't say, ooh. Like, we get Joseph of Arimathea and Aramaic. Not even the guy we were looking for.
No, this is like a completely different and random person.
Yeah, who the whole joke is he died while carving.
Ah!
Yeah.
Which is one of the greatest jokes ever.
Yeah, well, I mean, it plays upon itself, too, when Brenevere, or Bernevere?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever his name is. The one that starts with a B, he's like, ooh, ooh.
No, it's more in the back of the throat.
It's but he's like, ooh.
No, a sound of surprise.
Yeah, which subverts our expectations again because there is a black beast that lives in this cave that's not the rabbit.
Yes. No, and again, we get a really, like, cool shift into an animated mode.
Mm-hmm.
There's, like, a whole run sequence, and then even they're like, and then we ran out of money, so we had to kill the animator.
They don't say ran out of money, they just say, and then the animator died, which was because, it wasn't because they ran out of money, it was because Gillian had wrote himself into a corner that he couldn't write himself
so
out of.
So he's like, time to die.
Yeah, that's the only reason he dies. And now we get the bridge of death with the old man from scene 24.
So stupid.
But it's also the bit's funny too because originally, like, they start bringing on, like, it's going to be a hard question. They have to answer all of them to advance. And Lancelot makes it across no problem. And then the next guy gets a really hard question. An
actually difficult question, yeah.
Yeah. And then, again, subverting our expectations, the bridge master dies because he can't answer Arthur's question to clarify his original question.
A great joke.
Yeah. And even Bredevere's like, why do you know so much about swallows?
I mean, I would love to know the answer about that.
Yeah.
But when you're a king, you just know things.
Yeah. Well, I guess. And I love how dramatic, like, them flying away is them just jumping over the camera.
Yeah.
I love how, like, knowing how they and why they did stuff makes the movie much more something I can appreciate because
I agree.
Little they did that actually works so well. Especially when them crossing the bridge and it's so dramatic. And then there's a 3-second intermission when we only have like 10 minutes of the movie left.
We're so close to the end of the film. Granted, though, I love an intermission and I do appreciate it. Do I wish it wasn't in the flashy lights? A little bit, but like it is funny.
A bit. But when they get to the other side, Lancelot's missing because he's arrested because the cops are somehow on the other side. And I don't know how they don't see him.
I don't know, but that's the reason.
Which, I mean, it makes me wonder if this is just like a bunch of man-child playing in their backyard, and if all this is, like, in their head, this story that they've built up.
I love that they don't tell you. Like, they just so quickly change to, like, nope, the police are here now, and everyone's getting thrown in jail, don't worry about it.
Just Lancelot right now, because...
That's true, just Lancelot for the moment.
Because now we found where the Holy Grail's at with the mystic ghost ship, and it's such a dramatic build-up, but...
It is.
It's the French again, who's like, we've outwitted you, you silly English K-nig-hts.
It's so bad, it's so funny.
I mean, we don't, it's such a great subversion because we're like, okay, maybe this movie is going to end kind of normally. He'll find the Holy Grail, he'll be fully King Arthur at this point, and it's completely, like, it's just thrown in his face.
Yeah, and also I love that they do such a good job of bringing back a few bits here and there that, like, they give them just enough time that you've almost forgotten about, like, the police officer or, honestly, even the knights. You didn't expect to see them twice.
Yeah.
And then, like, they bring back the French right at the end.
With more great insults, you son of a window dresser.
So good.
Well, also this scene, too, is kind of gross because... Originally, they were going to redo the bit of throwing animals down at them, and they couldn't get a stuffed sheep in time, and so they were just going to shoot it. Well, the day before shooting, they ended up finding a real dead sheep on the side of the road.
How
and
lucky.
Assistant director Gary Harrison wanted to use it, and so like they just cut it up and use like all the dissolved bits and stuff, and so it's a real sheep guts that they're pouring on.
Oh, these poor
Arthur.
guys.
And he hated that scene, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, no, I can't blame him at all.
But it works so well too,
It
because
sure
it does
does.
harken back to the original, or that first scene.
Yeah.
Which is great too, because they're like, okay, we'll do this. All of a sudden they're across, like they don't even have to take the boat to get back.
Oh
and
yeah,
they've
that's
got
true.
a full army with one of like the biggest build-ups in this movie we've had.
This is all of the people that they have available lined up.
I think they just said they had a bunch of like people who could show up and like not even like fully dress them too.
Yeah, no, like there's just people.
Yeah. But again, in true Monty Python and the Holy Grail fashion,
Mm-hmm.
it's all subverted because they're all arrested.
The cops are here, no more LARPing.
And it goes right to a black screen with goofy music and a very long wait until the credits. Like
An awkwardly long wait till the credits.
which is great though too, because it just, in a way, it does bookend the movie like how it started, where
True.
you got a dumb beginning, and you don't really have a conclusion to this movie. It just ends, and it's like, haha,
Yeah.
you guys are all in on the joke now.
Yes, no, I think the way it ends is honestly perfect. It ends in like such an idea of a tension and build, because like honestly the French are not even really the like main antagonist here.
Mhm.
There isn't one, it's just their own stupidity.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's no reason to fight the French, especially when you're all going to be arrested.
Exactly.
It wouldn't end the movie.
No, and I think it just ends with like just a perfect way to just say, hey, it's a bunch of sketches, guys. It doesn't mean anything.
The show's over.
Yeah. That's exactly what the music feels like.
Very much.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail, as we know, it's become a worldwide success.
It is.
I think for this movie itself is just an example of how to do sketch bits with little money and actually make a movie that is a full sketch movie.
I agree.
The budget for this movie was only £282,000.
Nothing.
Yeah, which
Barely anything.
part of the success too, which I didn't realize this, is because it was picked up in production to get a tax break, and some of the funders included Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin,
Good for them.
who were fans of Monty Python, I guess, to begin with.
That's true. Like, this, by no means was Monty Python, like, an unknown name. They were not getting no budget because they were, like, the mystery young dudes coming into town. They got no budget because people knew that they could make something with nothing.
Yeah, very much so. And they said it was only about 10 people who gave $20K a piece, so that's not a large production group of people producing a movie.
It's really not.
No, it's like going to your buddies who are, like, slightly richer than you, and like, hey, could you give me $1,000?
You want to spot me?
Yeah, you get enough of them to pay for a cheap movie.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. But I do appreciate that, like, from the get-go, they had no expectations of this ever being a high-budget movie. Like, even when they were writing it, they wrote it knowing that they were going to have a budget of, like, negative $2 and some gum.
Yeah, they were just making the movie to prove a point and that they could actually do it.
Yeah.
Well, and it was such a success, I guess it played in France until Life of Brian came out, which they had to change some of the writing for it, too, of, like, in France they didn't understand the peasants saying small rocks could float. It's just humor that was lost on them.
Yes, yeah.
Which I do kind of get, too, because I've dabbled in other countries' comedy films, and
it is very different.
It is very, very different, where, like, Sweden is very dry. It's very British in a way, but it gets darker than British at times.
True.
Granted, depends on what you're watching. If you're watching, like, old Bergman, then yeah, it's dark. Or, I mean, modern days, if you watch, like, in Bruges, and Bruges is very dark, but it's dry.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, when I've dabbled into, like, Japanese comedies, I don't fully get them half the time.
It's a lot more physical slapstick.
Well, and also, I don't know the language, so sometimes the play on words doesn't work for me.
That's true. And I think that is part of the success, though, of Monty Python, is even though there were definitely parts that did not either hit well in other countries or were just lost, most of the movie is so basic, just switch and bait with a straight man.
Yes.
That, like, almost everyone was able to enjoy at least some part of it. And I think that's really what led to it being such a global success, was you didn't need to enjoy the entirety of the back and forth bit with the French. You could enjoy the Black Knight part.
Yeah, very much like how when we talked about, like, A Fish Called Wanda, where it subverts the expectations of what you think this movie's going to be, it does it in a very similar manner.
Yes.
Unfortunately, A Fish Called Wanda hasn't had as much of an impact, I would say, as Monty Python.
I agree, and I think also part of that, though, is Monty Python already had a leg to stand on in Great Britain. Like, they were already a well-known sketch group.
Mm-hmm.
By the time this came out, they weren't just an English sketch group. Like, they were known in the States, at least.
Yeah.
And it was something that was easily distributed, too. Like, yes, there's a little bit of blood, but other than that, there's really nothing to censor.
No.
There's not a whole lot of bad language, if any, really at all, depending on where your line for the bad language cutoff is.
Damn and pussy jokes.
Yeah, and even then, it's very light and very quick.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of blood, but honestly not enough that, with the exception of, I think, a handful of places that, like, put a little bit of a warning, but they didn't change the rating. So for the most part, this had a really great success of just kind of going across the world with pretty good ease.
I mean, to be fair, when Monty Python came out, you had PG and I think R at that point. So there was no PG-13.
That's true, but, like, this is one of those ones where, like, even nowadays, whether or not it would make it to PG-13 is, I mean, it probably would, because a lot of people would want to argue that this is for a more adult audience.
Yeah, I mean, Beetlejuice has fucked twice, so.
Exactly, like, they could have gotten away with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have to, though, and I think that really did help getting to countries that otherwise definitely would not have, like, enjoyed the humor of just, like, a British comedy.
Yeah.
This was a very, like, clean-cut movie for the most part.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show that you don't have to have something overly complicated or too smart to work with it.
True.
And still be a smart movie, because, like we said, it is, at times, a very serious medieval movie. It just takes that and then pokes fun at it.
Yeah, it puts it in the mud and makes it eat it.
Yeah, exactly. But also one thing I admire is in the commentary, Gilliam and Jones, they didn't believe in reshooting or retouching, and they saw this production as a very naive adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and then they learned from it and just moved on to their next project. They haven't gone back to, like, retouch it, redo some scenes. It is...
Yeah, no, it's exactly the way it always has been.
And that's what makes it timeless, too, is, like, it doesn't have, like, George Lucas fuckery where, yeah, Star Wars would still have been of its time when the graphics have been great. No, but it still would have had that same staying power.
Sure.
You just don't have to go and fuck with it again.
Oh, no, definitely. And on top of that, I think they knew where their strengths lied, and that was with mostly the humor.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't need to be filming. They weren't even filming at the time in the highest quality sound or film.
No.
Like, this was pretty basic.
No, not at all.
And they were always fine with that. Like, as a troupe, they were all either writing, acting, or directing together. Like, yes, it was very much the Terry's main brainstorm, but everyone was on board, and I do think that is what, even though there were some arguments, there were some differences, having everyone on board to say, like, well, we're gonna make something that is Monty Python.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's, going left and right and all over the place. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, you can see the sketch inklings
Mm-hmm.
in their other two movies, Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life.
Yes.
Like, I guess in a way you can still see... Because Terry Gilliam did another movie that's in a similar vein called Jabberwocky
Mm-hmm.
after Monty Python. And it's the same kind of comedic overtone to it. You see it in Time Bandits. A little bit in The Fisher King, but The Fisher King gets really dark. Brazil's got it.
Yeah, no, it was just their style. And I think this also, for a lot of people, hits a really good sweet spot for the young adult and teen audience. It has a lot of really great repeatable lines. It has a lot of very good humor that range from slapstick to one-offs like the French bits. So most silly teenagers will find something to love, and honestly, if you can get a teenage audience, you will have fans for life.
Yeah.
And that's proof. Like, people watched this all from the beginning, just like Kung Pao. People watched this, and they still watch it because they watched it, and it was funny then, it's funny now.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, how do you rate Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
It has weird scenes, but not very much, honestly. It's pretty straightforward as far as what it's presenting for itself, so for me, this is just a good. I know it's got some, like, goofy bits and stuff, but I don't know if, for me, that changes it to weird just as so much as silly.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it gets weird for me, and I'll give it a good weird rating myself. Sure. Because the absurdity just goes a little bit too over the top at times, to the camp of weird of, like, a knight asking a monumental task to be cutting down a tree with a herring. But
no, I can totally see where you get the weird.
But in a good way. It's not like weird and off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
It's charming in its weirdness.
It very much is. Yeah, no.
Quirky, I guess, is what I'd call it. But we don't have a quirky rating.
We do not have a quirky rating. And I totally see where you get the weird. For me, though, they're just a bunch of silly little guys.
Yeah. So do you recommend Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Every day of my life. Every single moment of my life. Granted, I totally understand. Like I said, I have a friend. She does not like British humor at all. She has given it a try on my behalf. I appreciate her efforts. She does not like it still. That's okay. But this is one that, like, even if you have seen it and you're like, no, I've watched it. I'm done. I watched it so much as a teenager. Watch it again. You'll be surprised how much you again re-enjoy it.
Yeah, I definitely am in the camp of watch this movie. At least give it a watch. I love that it still has its staying power. Almost 50 years now. Yeah.
It's still just as funny. It looks exactly the same as it always has. It sounds exactly the same as it always has. And like, honestly, the fancy DVD is worth it, especially if this is your kind of humor.
Yeah, and from a filmmaking standpoint, it's just a perfect example of how to do a movie on a budget and also do a bunch of sketches well enough and how to stitch them together into making something relatively cohesive, even though the bits don't always 100% line up.
I totally agree. I think for a lot of us, this is one we've loved dearly. We might have forgotten that we haven't seen it in a while. Time to dust it off.
Yes. So, now it's the time of our show. 3 Degrees of Takashi Miike. We're coming to an end. It's our second to last one.
You've already technically won, which means we are going to get a whole month of Miike soon.
Yes.
But for funsies, how did you do it?
For funsies, I went with director and actor of Patsy, Terry Gilliam, who was in The Monster of Nyx with Tom Waits, who was in Until the End of the World with Nato Takanaka, who was in Agitator, directed by Miike, a film about a rival gang, like the French and the English. A dead body is found, and there is violence, and the body count is too much.
You have done it again.
Yeah, Agitator is fun.
Very well done.
I think you could watch, you would enjoy Agitator.
I will put it on the list.
Gets rapey at one point, but it's good.
Alright. We'll skip that scene.
It's an important scene.
Alright.
But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace!